Hello, fellow bibliophiles, and welcome back to Blatantly Bookish. I'm Marissa, and it's been a while. I've had a lot on my plate personally this summer, and I haven't been dedicating my time as much to this channel as I'd really like to. I think I'm going to do a whole Paper Cranes conversation video about what's been going on with me in my personal life, and I'll probably work it in with the 3-year Q&A that I will be posting pretty soon. But we'll see what works out. I haven't done a reading wrap-up in quite a while, so I thought I'd sit down and chat with you about the books I've read this past summer in the months of June, July, and August. In the month of June, I read 3 books, the first of which was Victoria, 24 Days That Changed Her Life by Lucy Worsley. I loved this book. Lucy Worsley just writes the most fantastic nonfiction. It's well researched and historically accurate, it's detailed and engaging. You can always feel her passion for the subject matter behind her writing. In the past, I've read Jane Austen at Home, which is by far my favorite biography of Jane Austen, and I read The Art of English Murder, also by Lucy Worsley. Both were immensely engaging nonfiction reads. Is it weird to have a favorite nonfiction author? Because I think I have one, and it is Lucy Worsley. Anyway, this Queen Victoria biography focuses on 24 days that are emblematic of Queen Victoria's life, and it covers the period from her birth to her death. So about half the book is devoted to her early life and marriage to Prince Albert, and the other half delves into her widowhood and later reign. As someone who loves Victorian literature, learning about the monarch who the time period is named for has always interested me. It's fascinating to see how the female monarch was situated in such a high seat of political power and thrived in a society where women didn't even have the right to vote. She was simultaneously held to the societal standards of a woman, daughter, mother, wife, widow, and yet she ruled the British Empire. Like the Victorian era itself, a peculiar mix of great progress and stringent social restriction, Queen Victoria's life was full of inherent contradictions. This book doesn't have a ton of factual information that I didn't already know about Victoria's life. I've read other Queen Victoria biographies before, and this didn't have any shocking new news about her life. But what I did love so much about this book is how it didn't try to push any one image of Victoria on the reader. Some biographies try to paint her as the perfect mother and focus on her relationship with her children. Some focus on her mourning, which does play a rather large role in her life. Some focus more on the relationship between Victoria and Albert. Some focus on her role in growing the British Empire. This book was wonderful in that it acknowledged all of the common perceptions and portrayals of Victoria's life, but for the most part it allowed the reader to form our own judgments of her. It allowed all different takes on her life to exist simultaneously, and it was wonderful. I highly recommend this one. In June, I also listened to Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince by J.K. Rowling on audiobook. I've been rereading the series on audiobook, and I actually just finished reading The Deathly Hallows in the month of September. So I think I might try to do a whole video on my experience rereading Harry Potter. I'm going to skip discussing the last 2 books for now until I decide exactly what I want to say in that video. So watch out for that video where I discuss all about Harry Potter and my experience rereading it. Also in June, I read The Body in the Library by Agatha Christie. I have not read nearly enough Agatha Christie, but I have fallen in love with all of the books of hers that I have read. This one is a Miss Marple mystery. The premise is that a couple wakes up to find the body of an unknown blonde dead in their library. Both the local police and Miss Marple are brought in to investigate, and we soon find out that this young blonde is connected to a local hotel, a large inheritance, and yes, another murder. Miss Marple and the detectives step in and get to the bottom of this young woman's death. I absolutely love Miss Marple as a character. Dare I say that I may like her more than Poirot. To be fair, I think I might have read more Miss Marple than Poirot's stories, but what particularly resonated with me in this book is Miss Marple's uncanny ability to understand human nature. I suppose you can say that about most detective figures, actually, but Miss Marple has an uncanny talent for using ordinary events from her past and relating mundane local occurrences to the situation at hand. Miss Marple's observations also bring into question class relations and expectations in interesting ways. One of my favorite aspects of this book was how it also poked fun at itself with all of these references to how finding a body in the library would be just the type of thing that happens in novels. And of course there's the beautiful plot twist at the end There's a reason Agatha Christie is called the Queen of Mystery, so I must read more by her soon. And then July was Jane Austen July. I had such a great time reading lots of Jane Austen's works and hearing about everyone else's reading experiences as well. There was some fantastic Jane Austen content floating around BookTube this year, and I feel like I'm still not caught up on all of it. So thank you again to everyone who participated, and thank you to Katie especially for hosting it with me. I hope we do it again next year. I imagine we will, since we're already discussing which of Austen's books the two of us want to read together. This year, though, I read the Watsons and Sanditon for the very first time. These are two of Jane Austen's unfinished works, and when I say unfinished, I don't mean like Wives and Daughters unfinished, where Gaskell died before completing the final chapter or two. I mean unfinished, like these are barely started. The Watsons cuts off before the plot really gets going, and Sanditon is just a fragment, really. You can see many elements of Austen's finished works in these pieces, though. The Watsons centers on Emma Watson, the youngest of the Watsons, who has been brought up by her wealthy aunt, but when her aunt remarries, Emma has to return to her father's house. There she meets a whole host of characters, including the wealthy Osbornes and Lord Osborne's arrogant and social climbing friend, Tom Musgrove. Austen lays the groundwork for a really promising novel that focuses on her usual topics of class, love, and marriage. Austen never finished the work, but she did confide in her sister Cassandra as to how the novel was to play out. There are a few sentences at the end of my copy describing the plot that Austen had in mind. Personally, I don't much care for the ending. I would have wanted more interaction between Emma and Tom Musgrove, and I disapprove of the match Austen was going to make for Emma. But I keep telling myself, what would I think if I read the first few chapters of Pride and Prejudice, or Emma, or any of her other main 6 novels, and then was just abruptly told the ending? Would I be satisfied? Of course not. There's so much character development that happens over the course of Austen's novels that reading the first few chapters is simply not enough to fully comprehend the work. I think The Watsons could have been as compelling as any of Austen's main 6 novels, but we'll never really know because, of course, she never finished it. I like The Watsons far better than Sanditon, yet of the two works, Sanditon seems to get all of the literary attention. And I guess I understand why. It's what she was writing when she died, and therefore represents the future of Austen's writing had she lived. And I do often wonder, what would Austen's writing have been like had she lived longer? What would a Victorian novel by Jane Austen be like? We'll never know, of course, but Sanditon is the closest we will ever get to seeing how Austen's writing would have progressed. Unlike The Watsons, which Austen, for one reason or another, chose to abandon and never finish, Sanditon was possibly a promising 7th main novel that Austen didn't have the choice to complete. Unlike The Watsons, we don't know what was supposed to happen in Sanditon, but Sanditon seems, to me, upon first read, to be more similar to Mansfield Park than any of the other novels. There don't seem to be any burgeoning love interests in Sanditon, and it seemed to me that the book would center around the seaside town of Sanditon more than any of the characters in particular. And in the work's short span, there's already a collision of race, class, and empire with the news that a wealthy family from the West Indies will be coming to Sanditon, and with the introduction of a half-mulatto character named Miss Lamb. It's hard to say where Sanditon would have gone plot-wise. I imagine it would be rich with themes of class, race, and empire, and Sanditon's role in forming its own identity and how that identity is spread to and appreciated by others. I know that there's a BBC miniseries that came out this year about Sanditon, and I do really want to watch it and see where they take this interesting fragment. For July, I also read Northanger Abbey and Sense and Sensibility by Jane Austen. I discussed Northanger Abbey quite a bit in my vlog in July, so you can check out that video for some more specific thoughts, but I absolutely love Northanger Abbey. I think it is one of the more underrated Jane Austen novels. I do understand why a lot of people like it less than some of her other works. I do think it is one of Austen's more simple novels. But I think the simplicity of the plot allows the characters and the tone of the work to shine through all the more. When I first started reading Jane Austen, Catherine Morland was the heroine that I identified with most. She's young and fresh and impressionable, and she's so naive and mixes fact and fiction and lives in her own little world. And many times I do still identify with Catherine Morland. There's still an aspect of myself that is very trusting and open in relationships, the way that Catherine is so trusting of Isabella. And like Catherine, I don't always realize that someone is manipulative and fake, like Isabella, until it's too late. I love Catherine's ever-optimistic attitude, and I love the tone of the book, the way it pokes fun at itself and yet mounts a defense for the novel as a genre. And of course, I love Henry Tilney. His wit and sarcasm is a treat to read, but I discuss all of that in the vlog. The second half of the book on this reread wasn't as enjoyable as the first half for me, and I can't quite discern why. Regardless, Northanger was a delight to reread this July. And Sense and Sensibility. Sense and Sensibility is perhaps my least favorite Austen book. Now, being a least favorite Austen is still great praise, and Sense and Sensibility would still rank higher than many, many books I've read. Still, it's not my favorite Austen. I personally find something slightly trite about Sense and Sensibility's morals of needing both Eleanor's sense and a bit of Marianne's sensibility to function in society. I don't love Marianne's story arc in general and how her spirit is seemingly tamed and controlled by the end of the book. Nor am I convinced that her relationship with Colonel Brandon is a healthy one. It's pretty disturbing to me that Colonel Brandon sees Marianne as basically a reincarnation of his long-lost love, and I question whether Marianne truly feels for him or simply sees him as a stable and sensible option by the end of the book. Still, I love Austen's portrayal of close sibling relationships in this novel, and I was intrigued on this read by the sibling-in-law relationships as well, that of Eleanor and Colonel Brandon and Edward and Marianne. Oddly enough, at one point in this book, on this read, I thought that Eleanor and Colonel Brandon would make an excellent match. Though I do love them as friends, and I love how they conspire to look out for Marianne's best interests. There's a lot that I dislike about this book, but there's also so many interesting aspects of Sense and Sensibility to analyze and appreciate. It does have some of the more fascinating characters in Austen. Lucy Steele, who I love to hate but then feel a little bit sorry for, and Willoughby, who is fascinating as a remorseful rake. There's certainly something to be said for a book that I'm still thinking about and trying to analyze months after I've read it. It's quite amazing how my least favorite Austen is still such a wonderful read. In July, I also read Longbourn by Jo Baker. I talked about this one in great detail in my July vlog, so you should check it out for some more specific thoughts and some pretty great quotes from this book. Longbourn is a retelling of Pride and Prejudice from the servant's point of view. It's a novel idea and such an engaging take on the original story. Sometimes it's easy for us as modern-day readers to forget while reading Austen that servants are ever present in her texts. They're cleaning and cooking and mending clothes and carrying mail and are intimately familiar with Austen's characters and domestic dramas. It's something that Austen's contemporaries, having servants of their own, would be far more aware of. Longbourn draws our modern-day sensibilities to the attention of the servants, and in doing so, emphasizes, exaggerates, and even changes our perceptions of Austen's characters. Mr. Bennet shows even less regard for Mrs. Bennet than perhaps we can even imagine in the original text of Pride and Prejudice. And Mr. Collins becomes charming and amiable in the eyes of the lower class. You really have to read it to understand and even believe it. And Wickham's predatory nature is exaggerated and emphasized to the point of disgust. Though I thought some of the plot points weren't to my personal taste, I do highly recommend this book for anyone who is seriously interested in Jane Austen, and in particular Jane Austen's work with relation to class. And then in August, I read Pyramids by Terry Pratchett. Pyramids is the 7th book in the Discworld series, which I am ever so slowly making my way through. I think there are 43 or 44 books in this series, so this is a project that will take me a very, very long time. I like reading a few Discworld books a year when I'm in the mood. They are marvelous at snapping me out of reading slumps, and I absolutely love Pratchett's wit and humor. Pyramids takes place in an ancient kingdom modeled off of ancient Egypt called Jelly Baby, which is the best name for a kingdom that I have ever heard of. The book centers on the character named Tepic, who, after being trained at Ankh-Morpork's Pork's famed assassin school, inherits the position of Pharaoh of Jellybaby. But having been abroad for so long, he finds the culture of his home kingdom to be backwards and uncomfortable. He finds himself in a power struggle with his chief advisor and high priest, Dios. Can Tepic manage the kingdom, or will he be the ancient civilization's ultimate downfall? This was such a fun book. I swear I say that about each of the books in this series. But this one seemed even quirkier and more wonderful than usual to me. Pyramids is one of the Discworld books that some people recommend starting with, and I do see why. It's quite enjoyable and introduces a whole host of new characters, so it's rather accessible to all, even if you're not familiar with the series or any of the other books in it. Other people say that the next book in the series, which I have not read yet, Guards, is a good place to start as well. That's actually where my husband began, and he loved it. I personally had a great time starting with the 33rd book in the series called Going Postal. I don't really think that there's a bad place to start with Terry Pratchett's writing, though. He's magnificent. I used to feel very overwhelmed with the series and how long it was, but lately I'm just so thankful that there's much more Terry Pratchett for me to read in the future. August was not the best reading month for me. The only other book that I read was Treasure Island by Robert Louis Stevenson, which I listened to on audiobook. The book was surprisingly amazing. I ended up listening to it because it came free with Audible last month. But if you're thinking about your Victober TBR, I highly suggest Treasure Island. I found it to be very accessible and would be a good pick if you're new to Victorian literature. It also, depending on which version of the book you pick, could count as Katie's challenge of a book that's under 250 pages, or over 500, but in this case I'm talking about under 250. I looked it up on Kindle and I saw versions that are 139 pages, 241 pages, 247 pages, and then also a few that are over the 250 mark. But I think you could squeeze it into Katie's challenge. This book is the coming-of-age story of Jim Hawkins, the innkeeper's son of a rural inn on the West English coast called the Admiral Benbow. Jim's life is changed forever when he bonds with an unusual guest at the inn, an old sailor named Billy Bones. His relationship with Billy Bones gets Jim mixed up in a quest for the long-lost treasure of the infamous pirate Captain Flynn. It's an adventure story full of pirates, mutinies, and the promise of treasure. Many of the stereotypical images that we can conceive of pirates stem from this book. Treasure maps where X marks the spot, one-legged seamen with a parrot on their shoulder, the quintessential pirate, Long John Silver, yo-ho-ho and a bottle of rum, it's all in this book. But what you might not expect to be in this book is a fascinating examination of Victorian respectability, morality, and class. As Jim interacts with pirates, criminals, and outlaws of the English crown, he must decide for himself what is right and what true Victorian morality is all about. I think this is a spectacular book, and I can't believe that I never read it before. So that is what I read this summer. It has been a crazy summer for me, and I hope things start to calm down in my personal life this fall. I hope that I can manage to go back to a monthly reading wrap-up for you, because this was quite long and I'm a bit out of breath at this point. I had so many books to think about and talk about, and I'm kind of worried that I didn't do them all of the justice that they deserve. So, what have you been reading lately? Have you read any of these books that I spoke about? If so, what did you think about them? If not, are there any that you're excited to read soon? And what was your favorite book of the summer? I look forward to hearing all of your thoughts in the comments down below. And until next time, I look forward to seeing you in another video soon. Bye!
Trees swaying in the summer breeze, showing off their silver leaves as we walked